Well, I'd like to welcome everyone here tonight. Again, thank you very much for coming. Thank you not only coming for tonight's lecture, but for those of you who are able to attend any of the others or even all of them. We truly appreciate it. For those who missed the lectures, we do have them online. If you go to the website, you will see that the lectures, at least, we don't have the film online. We had a wonderful film last week, and because it has not yet been in theaters or copyrighted or sold, they didn't want it copied. But we did actually have a little bit of the dialogue afterwards, the discussion, the question and answer for those who came last week. And actually, it was a very fascinating story of Flannery O'Connor. In fact, I have to go run and pick up my copy of short stories to reread. Tonight, we have our last lecture, and we have someone hopefully that most of you, if not all of you, know, Father Ed Vasek. And Father Vasek has been part of this community, the 1030 community that meets here on Sundays, but also working in the Religious Studies Department. I'm going to ask Flida Garceau to introduce him and to really allow us then to welcome again our last speaker, Father Ed Vasek. But first, Flida. Oh, she's there.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity, Father, because Father Vasek does the Eucharist with us, say, every 5 weeks or so, and it's some of our favorite times because he's very natural. His anecdotes are always enjoyable. And he is just a loving person. He does penance with the community and anyone who wishes to come during Lent and or Advent. So some of us had the opportunity 2 Saturdays ago to be with Father. So thank you for all that you've given us. Edward Vasek holds a license in sacred theology from Loyola University of Chicago and a doctorate in philosophy from Northwestern University. He came to Weston Jesuit School of Theology in 1981, which in 2008 became the Boston College of Theology and Ministry. He currently holds the Stephen Duffy Chair in Systematic Theology here in New Orleans at Loyola. Father has contributed over 60 articles to various popular and scholarly journals and books, and he is the author of the book entitled Caps, Love, Human, and Divine. He has given numerous talks to popular and professional audiences also. Father teaches moral theology with special interests in emotions and ethical theory, as well as sexual, business, and biomedical ethics. So I give to you Father Ed Vasek. Thank you.
Thank you, Fleda, for that introduction. I feel like I'm among friends, you know. This is hey, we gather together regularly, and so many of you I see regularly, and it's a privilege to be with you. It's a privilege to be part of this series, too. I could quite simply say I find God in you, and so I would want to be able to express that, but also to enable each of us to understand that. Is the sound coming right? Okay. I will try and, here's the deal. I have a very soft voice. I have told, use a microphone. It's not working? Yes, it is working. Okay, good. So, but still raise your hand if I'm not loud enough because I still have a soft voice. Okay, so there it is. I was told once upon a time to use a microphone, and I otherwise feel like I'm shouting at people, and it's just, anyway, so there you go. It's a privilege to be here. I do not have the skills of my predecessors, so we don't have a movie tonight. okay? We also don't have screens on which there's going to be slides and other sorts of things. I'm of a different age, and I'm, not happy about that, but that's just the fact. If you give me something along the lines of a hammer or a screwdriver or a pair of pliers, I'd be happy and willing to, redo the electricity in your house. But when it comes to simple things like all of that, when all you have to do is push a button, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So this afternoon, I printed off these little things that I've passed out to you. It took me 15 minutes, and the machine collapsed 5 times. And then I went to another machine because I simply couldn't get it to work, okay? So, again, simple things, the complicated electronic world. Electricity, fine. Electronics, not so fine. All right. I'm not here to try and argue for anything. I'm trying to describe some of the things that are involved in Ignatian spirituality. In the midst of that, I want you to simply ask yourself, well, what are my graces? And as I'll be trying to say, many people have different graces than the Ignatian graces. And I'm not here to persuade you to have the Ignatian kinds of graces, but rather to reflect on what are the graces that you might have. My hope is that we will be doing something that will lead to a growth in holiness. But holiness is quite diverse. And so each one of us needs to not be somebody else's saint, but to be the saint that we are called to be. I ask you with William James to reflect on your experience, to do what in a big long word gets called phenomenology of your religious experience, or again, just what kinds of experiences did you have? I want to reflect on what I do in terms of spiritual direction and enable each one of us to articulate what it is that we're going on, and if you have this possibility, to reflect on your experience. The reason I say that is because many people have no experience of God. When you're talking about finding God in all things, they don't know what you're talking about. They can't talk in terms of an experience. They can talk in terms of ideas sometimes, and sometimes they don't want to do that. I remember the dean of my school, my theology school, one time telling us all that after 40 years of praying, or being 40 years a Jesuit and praying most of those years, he suddenly was told that he could experience God. And he said, "What?" When I entered the novitiate, there was no talk about experiencing God. It was a matter of, hey, you believe. You take it on faith. You do these sorts of things. And he suddenly found out that you could experience God. I know others for whom there's no experience. Others Jesuits for whom there's no experience of God. It's basically a matter of blind faith. God bless them that they have that courage. I don't have that kind of a courage. I have an emotional relationship with God. It's an emotional relationship that gets strained at times. It's also, I think, very Ignatian, although, as you know, Ignatius has his simple rational moments when he's trying to do discernment, but even so, he always says, now, test this out in terms of your relationship with God, and it's not tested out in relationship to the church teaching. It's not tested out in relationship to the catechism. It's tested out in terms of your relationship to God. So, people are different in this. Let me give you an example that came up to me as I was going through files, and I don't know why I had this file. I have a paper from a student that I had at Harvard, or at least he was a Harvard student and taking my course. And he described how he was studying for the ministry. This is 30 years ago, but he was studying for the ministry, and he was told that he was doing things wrong. He was in the hospital, and he was talking about people's prayer. And they were excited about people's prayer, and he was talking about their experience of God. And he brought that back to his committee and said, look at all the fine things that people really find God when I'm talking to them. And they said, if you do that any longer, you're going to be dismissed from the ministry. This is United Church of Christ. That's not what we priests do. We don't talk about the experience of God. We talk about doing the things that you're supposed to do in our church. And anybody who gets all excited about that is clearly not fit for our ministry. Now, he may have been crazy. I don't know. You know, I mean, they may have known that something that I didn't know, but that was his experience. He was dismissed. He was in the course that I was teaching on emotions in the Christian life, and so he was all excited about that. But he had been told that, hey, that's not suitable for a minister of God. So I'm not in that particular position. Karl Rahner, by contrast, said that every one of you, and maybe he's just being too close to Jesuit spirituality, every one of you is called to be a mystic. To be a mystic. In other words, to have an experience of God. And that is the vocation for every one of us. So the question is, are you called to be a mystic? And a mystic, not in the sense you go off into transport of, up into the heavens, but rather, I have an experience of the ultimacy of God. I have an experience of the mystery of God. So that's that's the approach that I'm going to take. It's trying to get at what it might be to experience God in all things. But it's an experience, an affective experience. So I hope that as we talk, as we're here together, each of us says, well, what is my experience of God? And as I'll say, many people don't have such an experience. But if you want to say, well, we're supposed to, let's put it this way, let me put it this way. It may be that class is dismissed, or let me put it in another way. I do this just for humor. I went to study where St. Ignatius talks about finding God in all things. He doesn't. It's a very Jesuit theme. He never, at least apparently, never used the words. He said finding God in all times. He said seeking God in all things. But the exact phrase, finding God in all things, which every Jesuit loves, and you see out on the marker. So I guess I could say class dismissed. We've got a topic on that doesn't exist. But I'll go forward anyway because it's such a sacred theme for all of us. So I want to start by putting a question to you, and it's meant to reveal. And again, there's not a right answer or a wrong answer, but where do you come on this particular question? Recently, a question was put to us Jesuits who preside, and the question had to do with this chapel. And the question had to do with, should we go to all of the windows and put up stained glass windows there? Nice stained glass windows. We could do it fairly inexpensively. It wouldn't be too costly. And we would be able to close this off as a sacred space. Should we do that? Let's try another alternative. Before we had these windows as they are, we had curtains lightly drawn. So you could sort of see out, but you couldn't really see out, and nobody could see in. Hey, that's got a certain appeal. And then we changed. We have open windows here so you can see out and people can see in. Which do you prefer? Now, there's no right answer to that, okay? There is a need for sacred space. There's a need for kind of withdrawn space. And then there's a need for open space. I'm going to propose to you that you've got 3 different spiritualities there. And each one of them has some place in all of our lives. Each one of them can be useful. I'm going to propose, as I said to my colleagues, and they certainly may disagree with me, leaving the windows open is Jesuit-like, finding God in all things. We can find God as we're praying here. We look out and, there are people out there. We're praying for them and with them. They can walk by and say, there are people in there praying. This is all part of the world. We are not escaping from the world, or let me say reserved from the world, but rather we're with the whole world praying when we pray here together. Now, each spirituality has its own significance, and I don't particularly, want to say anything more than, well, what would be your preference, and if so, what are your graces? So when we think about finding God in all things, it's a tendency to say, I want to find God in the trees, and I want to find God in the people, and I want to find God, hither and yon. And when I say Mass here, You probably have seen there's some times in which I pray like this because I want to be just quiet with God. And there are other times when I'm like this. I want to be quiet with you. I want to be with you because where do I find God? Right there. And the church teaches these various sorts of things. The church teaches that where can you find God? You can find God in the Word, the Scriptures. You can find God in the Eucharist itself. But then the church says you can find God in the community. And that's after, especially after communion, is where God is to be found. You are the place where God can be found. And then, unlike the previous, well, at least it need not end this way. There's still some possibility of ending. When you get done with the liturgy, you can say, well, hey, we're done. Or you can say, let's go out and find God in the world too. Now, that's a significant kind of different spirituality. One, there are sacred places where you find God. And two, God can be found everywhere. All of us need both of those, but the question is where are my graces, where are your graces? So, as I say, Karl Rahner thought, the primary place to find God is in the world. And what is the Eucharist? The Eucharist is kind of like, we bring all of that together from the week and we symbolize it. It's kind of like you're living with your spouse or you're living with your friend. Where's life? It's with your friend, it's with your spouse, it's with your children. And then from time to time you have a birthday party. You celebrate the life of the person with you. But it's not all about birthday parties, it's about the life you live, and then you have special moments in which you celebrate those life moments, that life that you generally lead. And so in the Rahnerian perspective, God is everywhere in our day. But we human beings need times when which, like at a birthday party, we bring a flower, or at a birthday party we make a cake, or at a birthday party we bring some presents. Because we also need to have specialized ways of announcing that our friendship is really important. But the friendship is long beyond the individual activity that we do. So now, a little example, and I'm a little hesitant. Just this afternoon, I was walking up to my office, and out came a young senior, probably two seniors, a young black man and a young white woman. They had been conversing, and then they gave one another a big, long hug. Now, you may say shame on me for noticing, but I thought that was wonderful. I think the work that Loyola is doing is wonderful, that these two people could feel like, oh yeah, they can affirm one another. I've heard about the racist South, or the racist North, however you want to, and look what's happening here. And I said, God is very, very, very present here. Now, that looking for moments in which we say, God's redemption, God's life, God's progress is with us, is the sort of thing that is involved in finding God in all things. So, let me try. Now, many people fit into the category of the nones, N-O-N-E-S. They have no reference to God. Many of the folks that we know have no reference to God. It's not that they're atheists, it's just, so what's your point? Just think of, let me give you a kind of a counter example, not a counter example, but a parallel example. I asked my students about the 737s that crashed. What 737s that crashed? Oh, I didn't know about that. I'd never heard about that. It doesn't make any difference to their life. So why should they pay attention? And God is like that. Oh yeah, there's 737s. I don't know, 747, 57, 67. What do I care? Okay. So that kind of an experience where much of the world, much of this stuff that we're talking about in religion just is not there. It's not that they're atheists and against it. It's rather, it's just not there. Now, On the other hand, there is kind of a secularism that has gone on. And again, the secularism is this world is just fine. You don't need God. And ask yourself, do I need God? Do you need God? The answer for a lot of people would be no, not particularly. I mean, there may be a God, okay, that's fine, but, the atheist would be tending to say, or the secularist would tend to say, I don't know. And you ask, do you need your friends? And they might say yes, and they might not say no. Do you need to love yourself? They usually would say, yeah, I need to do that. So we're mostly convinced that we need to love ourselves. We're somewhat convinced that we need to love others. And whether you need to love God or not, well, actually, frankly, Jesus' first great commandment, love God with your whole mind and whole heart, that's irrelevant. That doesn't count anymore. What's important is to love your neighbor or yourself. But loving God, not so. I sometimes want to ask and say, do you need oxygen? You depend on God all the time. Do you need oxygen? Well, they might say yes, but they don't think about that, and that's perfectly fine. Do you need food? Okay, maybe. Well, but the question is for Hopkins, Gerard Manley Hopkins, God is like the air we breathe. We very much need God, even if we paid no attention to the air that we breathe. So Christianity, in its best form, is almost like pantheism, and Jesuit spirituality, in my view, although not many would agree with me, is a panentheistic kind of religion. We belong in God, and God is in us, and that kind of mutuality is there. But for the secularist, I don't know what you're talking about. In addition to the secularist, there's the atheist. Now, there are some people who are religious atheists. I just made that word up. Okay, nobody's ever done that before. But it is what Karl Rahner talks about as is the anonymous Christian. They're really, really seeking for God. They just never seem to find God. And in that, they are religious. They're seeking for some ultimate meaning in life. And usually, but not always, one can say, well, let me talk about the God that you're seeking, and maybe we'll find out that your God is too small. Your God is not the God that you're looking for doesn't exist. But the God that does exist, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Jesus, oh, that's a different God, and maybe I can help you to find that particular God. There are, among the atheists, there are some of those who want to prove that there's no God, the anti-theodicists. And usually, again, I want to say, well, if you have a problem with God and evil, you're where you should be. Because our God is a God, I'm going to say this in a hyperbolic way, our God is a God of evil. A God of evil because we have a God of redemption. And redemption, you don't get redeemed if you don't have something to be redeemed from. And so our God is very invested in redemption, invested in the evils of the world, and that's a particularly Christian way of going at matters. There are other people for whom they're not just they are not just atheists in the sense of, well, there's no God, but there are some, not many, none of my friends, let me be clear, for whom they are what I would call a demonic atheist. Life is, no damn good. Some of us who have studied Freud know that at a certain point he picked up the ancient line of homo homini lupus, which translated equal, one human being is a wolf to another human being. We're all out to get one another. And basically life is miserable and then you die. Okay, that's a particular kind of attitude towards life. Again, nobody that I know has that attitude, but there are people just like that. So there are others among us who are atheists in the sense of other people are atheists. In other words, they belong to the wrong religion. And so if you're a Buddhist, well, you're an atheist. And if you're a Hindu, you're an atheist. And if you're a Muslim, you're an atheist. And if you're, frankly, if you're a Catholic, we don't know so much about these other Christians, okay? So that kind of a view, they have the wrong God, and so this sort of thing is sometimes said. Again, sad, 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 sad. So I'm suggesting that Jesus didn't get it wrong with the first great commandment, that we should love God, and that it is not enough to love ourselves or love our neighbor or even love the world. One of the things that people get mad at me, and that's okay, that's fine, is if you don't believe in God, you are objectively, and if you don't love God, you are objectively a sinner. Now, most of us would say sinners is somebody who does something harmful to others. The sinner is somebody who does something harmful to themselves. I agreed. But if the most important relationship in your life is there and you don't have it, you don't care about it, then you're missing something absolutely central. So it's important to find God in all things, or at least find God in oneself, but to find God is the important question here. So one can be these kinds of things, and yet there is something to be said about this hesitancy that people have, and it's appropriate. St. Augustine was pretty clear. The Latin is si sis Deum non est Deum quam sis. Translated in English is, if you know God, then it's not God you know. In other words, if God is a kind of finite figure and I got him, okay, that's, I can pin him down, or her down, I would like to also add, but I can pin God down, then it's not really God that you have. Now, that's one part of the agnosticism that has something to say, and all Christians in that sense should be somewhat agnostic. Like, I don't know who God is, and Thomas Aquinas was of a similar mind. If you really got God mastered, then it is not God that you have mastered. If you really got God figured out, then it is not God that you have figured out. And these are people who point the obvious. If you figured out your partner, your friend, then you also don't have your friend very well figured out. You have a relationship with that friend, but figured out is not the right kind of a word that you have. You grow in relationship, but figured out is not the right kind of a word, and you're always surprised by the new things that your friend can do or does say or does think. And so these are important features of our relationship with God. Surprise a minute, or surprise a week, or surprise a year. There's some change, some transformation that needs to take place. So again, question comes is well, where is my relationship to God? There's a tendency in the Catholic tradition to be fideist. I believe, and I have no experience. A very good friend of mine is of that mindset. Good religious person. I believe, but I have no experience whatsoever of God. It's a kind of blind faith. So rather than finding God in all things, I don't know what you're talking about. Or it comes by way of deduction. God is in everything, that's what we're taught, and this is in something, therefore God must be in it. Okay, good, therefore is the question. It's not like I experience God here, as I did with that young man and young woman giving one another a hug, but rather, it's my deduction that this is the case. This is what we're taught, and I go along with it. The religion that I grew up with was very heavily on that regard. It said, faith is the things that you don't understand, don't have any experience of, but you're told to, and you believe on the word of somebody who told you. Anybody remember the catechism from that? Okay. Basically, hey, we've been told a bunch of things, and hey, I've got no reason, or I'll believe them if you want me to. I believe that there's another side of the moon, and until the Chinese landed on it, I guess now we have proof of that, but before that, hey, I believe there's another side of the moon, so what? I believe there's a God, so what? Okay, there we go, I've got it. And there is a kind of blind faith, which, although I'm just mocking a little bit, it's actually rather profound. I used to try and do that experience, have that relationship or that understanding of God, and I almost left the church for it. It didn't work. There was a crisis in my life 7 years after I became a Jesuit. 7, 8, yeah, 7 years after I became, hey, I'm out of here. What happened is that I had a conversion, if you will, not a conversion to God, but a conversion to, one can experience God. And I remember desolate periods in which I went around walking the streets at night saying, no, 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 no. And I went to theology saying, well, I'll give it a semester and then I'll be out of here. And what happened there is I met a priest, an oblate priest, and he said, you can experience God. Let me show you. And I began, I meant to bring it out, and I won't bring it out, but I have now around my neck a little cross that he gave me. He's deceased now. He used to wear it around his neck. And I do so in honor of him who enabled me to be a priest, enabled me to go forward, enabled me to understand an experience of God. He was a great, great, great man, and when he died, he gave me this, or just before he died, he gave me this, and I carry it all the time. And, I've had to have it fixed twice, and now it keeps breaking apart, so I've tied it in knots, and there it is, and it's okay. It's not going to go anywhere, I hope. So anyway, the point being is that there is such a thing as an experience of God, and we have these broad experiences of God, and we have the more particular experiences of God. Nature, what we have in terms of nature is some of the places that Ignatius experienced God. He apparently really loved to stargaze. If you haven't been corrupted, and I mean that just humorously, if you haven't been corrupted by science, those are all just blobs of gas out there. If you've been able to appreciate the wonder of it all, then you have some experience. You can have some experience of God. For some people, not myself, sunrises are places where they experience God. Those of you who know me, I'm a night person, and I hate mornings. Okay, I hate mornings. And there are times when I see the sunrise, and it's only because I've been up all night, and and then I say, dress, I've got to get to bed here because if sun gets too high, then I won't be able to go to sleep. Sunsets, however, I love that. That's where God speaks to me. But sunrises, sorry, not. But other people, in a different way, they have these kinds of experiences. One of the places that people have is in terms of the people experience of God and the people around them. My novice master, I don't know whether he didn't learn names. In that he could be like me. But whenever he saw one of us, child of God. Child of God. Come in, child of God, And I think he meant it, okay? I mean, he really saw that. This was a child of God, and we were welcomed as a child of God. Now, at first I want to say, hey, no, my name is Ed, but child of God was appropriate, and I forevermore have been grateful for that particular kind of an experience. Other kinds of experiences, again, are of the dramatic size that we have. And most of our religious experiences are not dramatic. I think of the time that I was invited into, and I perhaps mentioned this on occasion to some of you, for the birth of a child. I can come in. This was back in the days when this didn't happen, when you didn't have movies, showing the birth of, everybody's probably seen a movie of the birth of a child now. But this was before anybody knew that. And there was my friend, splayed out, and they said, would you be there and watch it and take a picture of it? I'm thinking, that's where I'm supposed to be. Okay, there we are. But it was a miraculous experience to see a child be born. And just to see, Now, go to your biology textbook. It happens, a million times a day, a million times a year. It's basically a biological kind of an event. No, it's a miracle. What I say when I say it's a miracle is that we have the ability to see things not only in themselves, but also in terms of their relationship to God. And that was one of those moments in which I could witness the birth of this young man who's now, 30 years old, I could witness his birth and say, God is present, God is here. Now, there are different kinds of spirituality. The one that I suppose is prevalent in Ignatius is, and I might be imposing upon him, is that it's an experience of love. If you've ever had an experience of love, you perhaps have had an experience of the transcendent. You know there's something more going on than just you and her, you and him, you and the child, you and the grandparent, you and the person who's really really a powerful inspiration, you and the person who's prayerful, you and the person who's just lollygagging around over at the park. You have an experience that there's something more precious involved in all of that. And in those moments you perhaps have, or can have, or I do have, experiences of God as the Holy One. Now, again, as I've said, and I want to say it in a variety of different ways, what are your graces? Let me give you some contrasts, okay? Some graces. Assuming that you have some experience of God, I'm going to take just three big strands in Christianity. And any time that I put, this strand next to this strand, actually there's going to be a lot of overlap. Okay, let me be clear. And so I don't want to draw them for sharply, but I want to draw the distinctions between being a Benedictine and a Franciscan and the Jesuits. Okay, three different ways. And this is tendencies in the three different ways. If you are going to be a Benedictine, you're looking for a rhythmic pattern of life. You want to pray and work, possibly even in the fields. You want to go out and chant, and then you do your labor, whatever the labor is for the day. A good friend of mine is in a Carmelite monastery, and she prays, and then she makes cookies, and they sell the cookies to live on. Okay, that's their world. And it's a simple rhythm every day. One of the people that I have done spiritual direction for is really aspiring to this. It sort of hurts me, but he aspires to. Why does it hurt me? Because he's been to a Jesuit high school. He's been to Notre Dame, but got a good spirituality there. He's working. He's worked for the JVCs. He's very involved in prison work in this city. And he wants to go to a monastery. Now, I cheer, okay, but inside I'm saying, couldn't you be a Jesuit? Couldn't you be a Jesuit? He doesn't want to be a Jesuit. He wants to be where he can be quiet and prayerful. He finds God when he's working in the prison system, but that's not where God is primarily for him. And so, I encourage, I exhort, I will do everything possible to make it possible for him to become a good Benedictine or even a cloistered monk. Unlike the regular life that he's looking for, Jesuit life is highly irregular. Unlike the communal life that he's looking for, Ignatius said, you'll go off to India, and you'll go off to China, and you'll go off to Spain, and you'll go off to this, and you'll go off to that, and that's what you're going to be doing. And then you'll keep traveling, and don't let anything, any dust get on your feet. You're going to keep going, okay? So very different kind of a world. Ignatius was all about exceptions, and he was all about difference, and go anywhere where there's hope for the salvation of souls. Anywhere. Do anything. Whatever it takes is very different than you wake up, you do the daily office 5 times a day, you do your work making cookies or whatever the equivalent is, and that's a completely wonderful, wonderful life, but it's not the Jesuit kind of life. So Ignatius was quite different than a Benedictine, also different than a Franciscan. This, I think, is partly a judgment against us, but I'll say it that way. The Franciscans aspire to poverty. Now, Jesuits right from the very beginning, St. Ignatius insisted on poverty, and it didn't work. We should beg every day, not have any money in the bank, and it didn't work. It didn't work because he began to do big works, big things. And to do big things, you begin to need some big money. And so there was this strain right from the beginning where Jesuits, even in the Franciscan order, Francis wanted to have no accumulation. Well, other people had to go out and beg for him so that he could get it. But, he could say, hey, we live on the graciousness of God. Now, could I have something from you and something from you and so on? So unlike that, Ignatius said, we'll try to do that, and it doesn't work. Another thing that was characteristic of St. Francis, preach the gospel, if necessary, use words. Have you ever met a more wordy people than Jesuits? Okay. There are places where we're confined, where the government forbids us to preach, okay, and we're there. But that's so uncharacteristic of us to be in a country where you're not allowed to talk much about God. We still do that because our presence is there. But the Jesuit gift is the gift of gab, at least in part. It's the gift of being able to speak. Jesuits, simplicity is Franciscan simplicity is important. You don't run a university on simplicity. We've got a major budget, and I should now have Tanya Tetlow come in and ask for $1 million from each of you, This is an institution that needs money. Okay, lots of things like that. Simplicity, fine, and yet so many of us get PhDs and beyond that. So that's part of the life that we have taken up. It's very un-Franciscan. Where should we be? We should be in the sciences. We should be in history. We should be in medicine. We should be in all of those places. And it's not a very simple life that Jesuits tend to lead. Now, I'm going to contradict myself, okay? Having just said what I've said, another part of Jesuit life, Ignatian life, is one of the places you must have in your life is to be among the poor. There's a famous part of I think it's, if I remember rightly, St. Robert Bellarmine. He went to the Council of Trent. He argued, so to speak, all morning for the faith. And then Ignatius said, oh, by the way, now spend your afternoon working with the poor. Okay, what? Both are important. Reframing the church's teaching and make sure you make it over to the hospital so you can say hello to people who are sick. Both parts of that are part of the Ignatian charism. And the Ignatian charism, as you perhaps know, once upon a time was all towards, or at least heavily towards universities and education, and now we do a lot of work in the slums, or we have schools that are for the kids who otherwise wouldn't make it. That's really important. One of the things I'm proud about of Loyola, well, two things I'm proud of, and this is the dichotomy. I get to teach the honor students. They're really smart. I get to teach some of the undergraduate students, and they're not really smart. Okay? And I mean, I'm happy. I'm happy to be able, that's where we should be, is with those kids who otherwise wouldn't make it, who come here and they, okay, here's how you open a book. I mean, it's not that bad, but here's how you open a book, okay? I mean, it's like, oh, you expect. So both parts are part of the Jesuit vocation. Complexity is part of the Jesuit vocation, and that's the sort of thing that I rather appreciate. So Ignatius was one who said, rich and poor, we should be with both, and complicated. We should be here and we should be abroad. We should be willing to be stable, but mostly we should be willing to go at a moment's notice. So it's a very different kind of lifestyle that is part of the Jesuit life. So now I want to talk a little bit towards a conclusion. Well, not quite. Oh, I should. Okay. Let me do this. there's a way of relating to things, obvious. There's an extrinsic way. We live in a world where things have value extrinsically. My favorite current examples are one, you've ever heard of the shoe store Payless? They did an experiment. They rechanged the name Paylessy. They put it in a mall, a fancy, fancy mall. They took the same shoes that used to cost $50 and they raised the price to $550. Rich people came into the mall and they loved the shoes. Okay? They had enough honesty as the rich people are leaving and saying, this is the best pair of shoes I've ever had. Oh, by the way, let me tell you the truth, okay? You just bought a $50 pair of shoes, but you think you paid more. The same thing can be said in terms of, there was another famous story of, in terms of, there was a bourbon that was selling for $20 a bottle. And they weren't selling very much. And so they decided they were going to lower the price to $15 so they could sell more. And then somebody got the brilliant idea, let's take the $20 bottle of bourbon and raise it to $40. And they sold like crazy, the same bourbon. Extrinsic value. What's a thing worth the dollar bill on the dollars that it takes to pay for it? Now, let's try again, extrinsic values and intrinsic values. And I put a question for you that I put to my students just a little while ago, 2-3 weeks ago. You got a choice. The choice is this. If you do no work and learn nothing, I'll give you an A, 100%. If you do hard work, this is a complicated topic, and I'm sure you'll only get at best an A-, maybe even a B+. What do you choose? 1/3 of the students said, "Hey, I want the 100%. I don't need to learn anything." That's extrinsic value. The other third, with some hesitancy, said, "Oh well, I really think learning is important," and so they were willing to go with that. Now, I didn't say, learn something and get an F, but learn something, and they would go with it. Yeah, that was plausible. And the third group was, well, if I could use the knowledge, then it would be worth getting. But otherwise, why waste my time? In other words, if it was going to help me to become a doctor or whatever, but it was just like learning poetry, who needs that, huh? So extrinsic value, intrinsic value. Now, in addition to extrinsic value and intrinsic value, there is personal value. Lots of things I hope you have in your life come into the category of personal knowledge. I've talked about the locket that I carry around from Luc Richard. If you ever had a family album and you got the house burning down, one of the things you might do is save the family album. Wait a minute, there's far more expensive things in your house than the family album. No, there's nothing so precious as the family album. That's who we are. So ordinary items, and again, you can see the extrinsic and the intrinsic value. At least I'll speak for myself. If a friend gives me a shirt, I really treasure that shirt. It may not quite be the perfect shirt, but I really treasure that. If a friend says, here's $50 and buy whatever you want, I may get the shirt that I want, but I don't get the personal friendship, that I don't wear my friend, so to speak, on my shoulders. So that element of personal is, I think, crucially important. And the reason I mention that is because, hey, that's what finding God in all things is about. Things are valuable intrinsically, extrinsically, personally, yes, but they're valuable also because, they belong to God. They're part of my relationship with God. If you've ever had the experience of being in love, and I think many of us have, if you've ever had the experience of being in love, you begin to see the world in terms of them. Oh, she would really like that locket. Oh, he'd look great in that particular shirt. Oh, I wish he could be here to experience this with me. Or even sometimes the experiences of, it was as if you were with me in Paris. But let me tell you about it because I want to fill you in, okay? So the sense of shared experience is the kind of thinking that I'm talking about when I say a religious significance is to find God related to, involved in many of the experiences we have. I was tempted to say every experience we have, and that's where Ignatius in the language really misleads us, huh? Finding God in all things? Come on. I remember one person, St. Francis de Sales, once was said, "Do you find God all the time?" He said, "Oh, no, sometimes I go 15 minutes without experiencing God." And I thought, all right, not me, okay. But can you experience God in the midst of the day? Some parts of that would come up in terms of, let me just conclude here with the examen of conscience. Examen of consciousness, we talk about that. It's a very Jesuit kind of a thing. St. Ignatius says that if you have to choose any prayer, pick the examen of consciousness, okay? It's not the examen of conscience, like what did I do wrong again today, but rather where has God been with me today, and where have God spoken to me today? And have I looked at God in the parts that are not so good? Remember, one of the unique things, or at least one of the special things about Christianity is we find God in evil. We look for evil and then try to remedy it. If there's somebody, if you're in a room in a party and there's somebody who's really not very pleasant looking, are you ever inclined to go over and spend time with him or her? Or do you say, hey, I'm going to be with the fun folks? No, it's perfectly fine to be with the fun folks. But if you don't ever have an inclination to be with the unfun folks, the poor people who don't look right or smell right or whatever, then I've still got some part of Christianity that needs to grow. So we have this finding God in all, and it sometimes can be finding God in the bad parts of life as well as the good parts. I know from conversations with many people, that's not acceptable. We should only look for God in the good things. Many people resist strongly that we should look for God in the bad things. And then Christianity gets the rap of, oh, you Christians are always about the negative stuff. And always is too strong, but yeah, we are about the negative stuff and how to redeem it, how to overcome it. And ignoring that and looking just for the good days is not fully Christian. So what we have here is a sense of sharing life with God, cooperating with God. One of the prayers that you have on the back of this sheet that you have is once you've fallen in love with God, then you want to say, oh, where are God's hands when we need them? There. And where are God's legs when we need them? There. And where is God's consoling word when we need it? There. And where is God's sense of affirmation? There. Or rescue? There. Or hi, there. If you can get into that, namely, you are the one, then you will be enacting God in all things. Thank you. Questions, thoughts, what do we do? Questions? Sure. When you do this, there's usually somebody says, and what do you think about the Red Sox? Anybody, questions, thoughts, reactions, reflections? Anybody? We get, okay. Onward to the local bar or on, Lisa.
When you were talking about blind faith and how
Mhm.
it led to a negative concept of God that could not support
Mhm.
your living as a child of God.
Yep.
Made me think of, what happened to Augustine's Fides Quaerens Intellectum?
Mhm.
faith seeking understanding, that understanding is not just intellectual understanding, but it's experiential. It's relational.
Sure. Oh, sure. And what I would want to say is with one of the saints, when we seek God, it's because God has already found us. In other words, this will not. There's a heretical side of a possibility of what Ignatius talks about when he talks about finding God or seeking God. The heretical part is that seems the initiative is ours. Ignatius was smarter than that. And what he was smarter about is what happens when the primary way that God works with us, so I believe, although many people would have a different view, is to say, here I am. And you say, oh, I discovered him. That's how God works. Here I am. Or, there's somebody out here. And you say, oh, I saw that person is in me. In other words, God primarily works by inviting us. By inviting us to do all sorts of, to be in relationship. You have a moment and you say, I just want to pray. You say, oh, I decided to pray. That's the heretical part. Heretical only because it's Pelagian, okay? Most of us are semi-Pelagians, and that's fine. But, you know, in other words, to think that we started it and we do everything, and then God comes along afterwards and says, oh, you'd go, what a good boy, what a good girl. That's Pelagian. Semi-Pelagian is much more recognizing that we have to take initiative, and the Ignatian, the proper way to put it is to say, God works mostly by invitation. God's saying, hey, and when you go and you find something, you say, oh, what a good boy am I, what a good girl that I am, that I discovered this poor person to help. Yeah, fine. But the really humble way is to say, oh, God invited me, and I responded to all of that. And so it'd be a big beginning of how I might respond to that. It's okay, we're going to go home and have a drink. All right, thank you all.
Again, I thank you all for coming. Thank you, Father Vasek. I appreciate all of you being here for one or all of our Lenten series, and we are very appreciative of everything you've given to our community and to our university. Thank you again for tonight. Thank you.